Have you ever watched someone get publicly humiliated, only to realize everyone had it completely wrong? A woman stood silently at a military firing range while an admiral mocked her in front of dozens of high-ranking officers. He dared her to extinguish a flickering flame at 1,700 meters, convinced she would fail spectacularly. The crowd smirked, some turned away. No one believed it was possible. But what happened next froze the entire base in stunned silence and made the admiral's confident smile vanish in real time. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories like this move you, consider subscribing. The rifle cracked once, and in that single moment, everything changed. Dawn broke over Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, Coronado, casting long shadows across the firing range. The Pacific Ocean churned in the distance, sending salt-thick air rolling over the concrete and steel infrastructure that had forged some of the most elite operators in the world. This morning, the range was alive with controlled tension. A live-fire sniper qualification was underway, observed by high-ranking officers whose presence alone elevated the stakes for every shooter present. Candidates milled around the staging area with varying degrees of nervous energy. Some stretched their shoulders and rolled their necks, working out the stiffness that came from hours of preparation. Others checked and rechecked their equipment, running through mental checklists they had memorized years ago. A few gathered in small groups, trading dark humor to cut through the anxiety that pressed down on everyone, like the marine layer overhead. The atmosphere carried the weight of judgment, of careers being measured in fractions of an inch and tenths of a second. Then there was the woman standing alone at the back of the staging area. She wore standard-issue fatigues that looked worn but meticulously maintained. No name tape identified her. No rank insignia marked her shoulders. Her rifle case rested beside her feet, the canvas battered and faded from years of use, but showing signs of obsessive care in its reinforced stitches and spotless zippers. She did not check her phone. She did not stretch or pace or engage in the rituals that helped others manage their nerves. She simply stood there, hands loose at her sides, eyes fixed on some middle distance that no one else could see. Her name, though no one present seemed to know it, was Sloane Rivere. The other candidates noticed her eventually. How could they not? Her stillness created a void in the chaos around her, a pocket of silence that drew the eye precisely because it refused to participate in the collective anxiety. A young Navy shooter glanced her way, then leaned toward his companion and whispered something behind his hand. The companion looked, frowned, and shrugged. Neither approached her. No one did. A senior chief walked past carrying a tablet, his eyes scanning the roster with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted 1,000 such qualifications. He glanced at Sloane, then down at his screen. His footsteps slowed, his brow furrowed deeply as he read something that clearly troubled him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. Without a word, he continued walking, though his pace had lost its earlier confidence. The sun climbed higher, burning off the marine layer and exposing the range to harsh California light. Names echoed across the PA system, calling shooters to their positions. One by one, candidates stepped to the firing line, settled into their positions, and sent rounds down range toward targets that shimmered in the heat. The crack of rifle fire punctuated the morning in irregular intervals, each shot followed by range officers calling out scores or offering terse corrections. Sloane continued to wait. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent toward the ocean. Other shooters finished their qualifications, packed their gear, and departed with expressions ranging from relief to frustration, depending on their performance. The staging area gradually emptied. Through it all, Sloane remained standing in the same spot, her posture unchanged, her face revealing nothing. She was skipped. Again and again, her name absent from the roll call despite her presence on the manifest. No explanation was offered. No range officer approached to clarify the delay. She simply existed in a state of bureaucratic limbo while others completed their evaluations and moved on with their lives. If the wait bothered her, she gave no indication. Her hands never clenched, her jaw never tightened. She stood with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that complaint changed nothing, and that the only response to injustice was endurance. The shadows lengthened around her. The heat radiating from the concrete began to fade as afternoon edged toward evening. Finally, after 4 hours of silence, A voice crackled over the PA system with the flat authority of military protocol. Revere, line 3. Every remaining head turned. The few shooters still present looked toward her, with expressions mixing curiosity and something darker. Whispers rippled through the thinned crowd. Who was she? Why the delay? What was so special or so problematic about this particular candidate that she had been kept waiting while others came and went? Sloane picked up her rifle case without hurry and walked toward the designated firing position. Her gait was steady and measured, neither rushed nor deliberately slow. She moved like someone conserving energy, like someone who understood that the real test had not yet begun. The observation deck overlooking the range held a different kind of audience. Senior officers clustered there, some reviewing data on tablets, others watching the proceedings with the detached interest of men whose own days on the firing line were decades behind them. Civilian contractors, in polo shirts and khaki, stood among them, taking notes for reasons that were never quite explained to the shooters below. Among them stood Admiral Garrett Foss. He was a man whose presence commanded attention without effort, silver hair cropped close to military precision, square jaw that had probably been chiseled even in youth, eyes that had witnessed combat and command in equal measure. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who had been wearing it for 30 years, the ribbons on his chest telling stories of deployments and commendations that younger officers studied in training manuals. When he spoke, people listened. When he moved, space was made. As Sloane approached the firing line below, Foss leaned toward his aide, a young lieutenant named Pasco Drummond, who looked uncomfortable in the role of proximity to power. Foss spoke at a volume that carried to the officers nearby, his tone mixing amusement and disdain in equal measure. The diversity hire? Scattered laughter answered him. Not everyone joined in. Some officers shifted their weight and found sudden interest in their tablets. But enough laughed to create an atmosphere of sanctioned mockery, of permission granted from the top to view what was about to happen as entertainment rather than evaluation. Lieutenant Drummond said nothing. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his position and kept his eyes forward. Whatever discomfort he felt, he swallowed it down where it could not interfere with his career trajectory. Below, Sloane reached her position. She knelt smoothly, opened her case with practiced efficiency, and began assembling her weapon. The rifle was a Mk13 Mod 7, the stock showing wear that spoke of extensive use. She moved through her pre-fire checks with mechanical precision, her hands performing tasks they had performed countless times before. Check the bolt, inspect the barrel, mount the scope, load the magazine. Each action flowed into the next without wasted motion. Admiral Foss stepped to the rail of the observation deck, looking down at her with the casual authority of a man watching gladiators from an emperor's box. His expression carried the confidence of someone who had already decided how this story would end. Revere. She paused in her preparations but did not look up. Her hands continued their work, adjusting the bipod legs to achieve proper cant on the uneven ground. You see that flame down range? Now she stopped. She brought her eye to the scope and adjusted the magnification, scanning the range until she found what he was referring to. At the 1,700-meter marker, barely visible even through magnified optics, a small candle flickered atop an oil barrel. The flame danced wildly in the wind, a point of orange light that appeared and disappeared as gusts swept through the canyon. The range fell silent. Even the officers who had been engaged in side conversations turned their attention to what was happening. This was not a standard target. This was not part of any qualification protocol. This was something else entirely. The wind flags positioned along the range whipped and twisted in conflicting directions, 8 to 12 miles per hour, gusting unpredictably, with no consistent pattern that would allow for reliable compensation. At 1,700 meters, the bullet would be in flight for multiple seconds, subject to every shift and eddy in the air between the firing position and the target. Hitting a static bullseye at that distance required elite-level skill. Hitting a moving target, especially one as small and erratic as a candle flame, pushed into the realm of the nearly impossible. Foss knew this. Everyone on the observation deck knew this. That was precisely the point. Think you can put it out? The question hung in the air like a challenge at a duel. Around the range, the remaining candidates stopped what they were doing to watch. This was theater now, public hazing dressed up as opportunity. The kind of impossible challenge designed not to test ability, but to create failure, to generate a moment of humiliation that would be remembered and retold. Sloane's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet and steady. No defensiveness colored her tone. No anger or frustration leaked through. She sounded like someone answering a straightforward question with a straightforward response. "I can try, sir." Foss smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just won a bet before the cards were even dealt. The smile of someone who knew the punchline before the joke was finished. He waved his hand in a gesture that was simultaneously dismissive and permissive. "By all means." Sloane settled into position behind the rifle. The world around her began to narrow, distractions falling away as she entered the mental space that separated good shooters from exceptional ones. Her breathing slowed, deepened, became rhythmic. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Each exhale slightly longer than the inhale, allowing her heart rate to drop, allowing the fine tremors in her muscles to dampen and still. She studied the wind flags again, watching how they moved, looking for patterns in the chaos. The breeze was coming primarily from the west, but swirling as it funneled through the canyon terrain. Every few seconds, the flags would align briefly before breaking into conflicting directions again. She would need to time her shot for one of those moments of temporary consistency, and even then, she would be making educated guesses about conditions she could not directly observe. Through her scope, the candle flame flickered and danced. It was small, perhaps an inch tall, and it moved in response to air currents she could only infer. The heat rising from the barrel would create its own distortion, bending light and adding another variable to an already complex equation. The flame would vanish behind the sight picture, then reappear, then vanish again. On the observation deck, officers watched with varying degrees of interest. Some leaned forward, curious to see what would happen. Others had already turned away, convinced the outcome was predetermined and unworthy of their attention. Foss remained at the rail, arms crossed, his smile still in place. Then something shifted. Ensign Tahir Locke, a young officer holding a tablet, suddenly went very still. He was reviewing duty rosters, cross-referencing names with personnel files as part of his administrative responsibilities for the day's qualification. His screen had just populated with information that made the color drain from his face. He leaned toward Lieutenant Drummond and whispered urgently, his voice carrying a note of alarm that he could not quite suppress. "Wait, is her file flagged?" Drummond glanced over, irritation flickering across his features at the interruption. But when he looked at the screen, his expression changed instantly. His eyes widened, his breath caught. For several seconds he simply stared at the information displayed before him, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was reading with what was happening on the range below. "Holy hell!" he breathed, the profanity escaping before he could catch it. "She's with them." Below, Sloane had found her stillness. Her breathing had reached that perfect rhythm where the body becomes a stable platform, where the chaos of biology is temporarily suspended in service of a single purpose. Her finger rested just outside the trigger guard, applying no pressure, waiting for the precise moment when all variables aligned. In sniper training, they teach that the space between heartbeats is where perfection lives. That infinitesimal pause when the heart is neither contracting nor relaxing, when blood is neither surging nor settling, when the entire cardiovascular system holds its breath. That is where the shot must happen, in the silence, in the stillness, in the microscopic gap between one moment and the next. Sloane's eye remained pressed to the scope. The crosshairs settled on the dancing flame. She watched it move, learning its rhythm, understanding that it was not truly random, but rather responding to forces she could predict if she was patient enough to observe. The wind flags shifted. A moment of alignment appeared, where west and northwest vectors temporarily canceled each other out. Her finger moved to the trigger. The pressure increased gradually, smoothly, with no sudden jerk that might disturb the rifle's aim. Professional shooters do not pull triggers. They squeeze them. They apply steady, increasing pressure until the weapon fires almost as a surprise, the exact moment of discharge unknown even to the shooter themselves. On the observation deck, Lieutenant Drummond was frantically scrolling through the file, his face growing paler with each line he read. He turned to Admiral Foss, opening his mouth to speak, to warn, to explain what they were witnessing. But he was too late. The rifle cracked. The sound was sharp and was clean, echoing across the range and bouncing back from the canyon walls in overlapping waves. For a fraction of a second, everything continued as it had been. The flame flickered, the wind blew, the world turned, then the flame vanished. Not a near miss that disturbed the air around it, not a hit to the barrel that toppled the candle. The flame simply ceased to exist, snuffed out as cleanly as if someone had leaned over and blown it out with their breath. The range froze. Every person present, from the shooters still packing their gear, to the officers on the observation deck, to the range personnel monitoring equipment, went absolutely still. For 3 full seconds, no one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to breathe. Then the chaos erupted. Officers surged toward the monitors displaying the scope footage. Voices overlapped in disbelief and denial. "Run that back." "No way. Check the wind data." "First shot." Someone confirmed the distance marker. Admiral Foss grabbed the tablet from Lieutenant Drummond's hands, his smile gone as if it had never existed. He scrubbed back through the recorded footage, watching frame by frame as the bullet's impact was captured in high-speed digital precision. The crosshairs centered on the flame. The shot broke. The bullet entered the exact center of the flickering light, its passage so precisely calculated that it extinguished the flame without disturbing the candle itself or striking the barrel beneath. The candle remained standing, unlit, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its wick. Surgical, impossible, perfect. Foss played it again, and again. Each viewing confirmed what his eyes refused to believe. The shot was not luck. It was not accident. It was the product of skills so refined, so absolute, that it transcended what he thought possible under these conditions. His hands began to shake, not from fear but from a dawning realization that he had just made a terrible mistake. Below, Sloane stood. She cleared her weapon with practiced efficiency, removing the magazine and opening the bolt to visually confirm the chamber was empty. She engaged the safety and stepped back from the firing line, her face expressionless, her movements unhurried. She gave no indication of satisfaction or vindication. She had been asked to perform a task. She had performed it. That was all. As she walked away from the position, Master Chief Boone Creel intercepted her path. He was a man in his late 50s, face weathered by decades of sun and wind and combat. Scars traced pale lines across his knuckles and forearms. His eyes carried the weight of having seen friends die and enemies fall and missions succeed and fail in equal measure. He was not easily impressed. He stopped in front of Sloane, studying her with an intensity that would have made most people uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice carried no congratulations, no warmth. "Revere." She met his eyes without flinching. "That was clean. Thank you, Master Chief." He continued to stare at her, reading something in her face or posture or bearing that others had missed. Finally, he leaned closer and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You shouldn't be here." The words were not a threat. They were a warning from someone who understood the game being played at levels above both their pay grades. "I was ordered to qualify," Sloane replied, her tone neutral. "No, you were ordered to fail." Something flickered in Sloane's eyes then. Not surprise, recognition, acknowledgement that someone else understood what she had already figured out. Creel glanced toward the observation deck, where officers were still clustered around monitors, voices raised in heated discussion. When he looked back at Sloane, his expression had hardened. "They're watching you, and not because they want to promote you." He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Sloane standing alone on the tarmac. Around her, the range began to return to its normal operations, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Word was spreading. The impossible shot. The woman who had made it. Questions were being asked that had no easy answers. On the observation deck, Admiral Foss finally looked up from the tablet. Lieutenant Drummond stood beside him, still holding his own device, the personnel file glowing on its screen. Foss's voice, when he finally spoke, was tight with controlled anger. "Why wasn't I briefed?" Drummond swallowed hard, his throat working visibly. "Sir, her file is compartmented. I didn't have the clearance to access it without specific need-to-know justification and authorization from higher authority. Open it now." Drummond hesitated for only a moment before entering a series of security codes. The screen flickered, displayed multiple warnings about classification levels and legal consequences of unauthorized disclosure, then finally populated with text. The file header appeared first, stark and uncompromising. Revere, Sloan E. rank redacted, unit redacted, current status listed as administrative leave pending review, clearance level TSSCI with special access requirements. Even the most basic information was wrapped in layers of classification that spoke to operations and missions that existed in the shadows where official acknowledgement never reached. Foss scrolled down, his expression darkening with each line. The operations log read like a greatest hits of modern special operations. 47 confirmed missions, 12 beyond line-of-sight eliminations, each one a technical and tactical achievement that most snipers would never accomplish once in their entire careers. Combat deployments across 4 continents, specialized training in urban counterterrorism, high-value target elimination, and psychological operations. The longest confirmed kill distance was listed at 2,390 meters. Foss stopped scrolling. He read that number 3 times, his mind automatically calculating the difficulty, the wind compensation required, the bullet drop over that distance, the time of flight that would give the target multiple opportunities to move. That kind of shot was not just skill, it was art and science and instinct combined in a way that could not be taught. Sloan Revere was not just a sniper. She was one of the best operators naval special warfare had ever produced. The kind of shooter they did not put on recruiting posters or parade in front of congressional committees. The kind they deployed when failure was not an option and when the mission could never be acknowledged. Foss continued scrolling until he reached the section that explained why she was standing on his range instead of overseas hunting targets. The incident report header was stamped with red classification markings that made even touching the file a potential security violation. Operation Ember Lake. The name meant nothing to him, which was precisely the point. The target was listed as Dr. Anton Ibarra, identified as an arms facilitator, suspected of selling U.S. weapons technology to hostile actors. The result was clinical in its brevity. Target eliminated, team extracted without casualties, mission success. Then came the complication paragraph. Post-mission intelligence revealed the target was actually a CIA asset operating under deep cover. The elimination order had been issued in error due to compartmented intelligence failures between agencies that were not supposed to overlap, but inevitably did. Someone in the chain of command had made a catastrophic mistake, and that mistake had resulted in the death of an American intelligence officer. The witness statement from Sloan Revere was included in the file, her words preserved in official record. I followed the order, I took the shot, but I also recorded the operational brief. The authorization codes were non-standard. The target dossier was incomplete. Someone wanted him dead, and they used us to do it. Foss closed the tablet and set it down carefully, as if it might explode if handled too roughly. He turned to look down at the range where Sloan had been standing, but she was already gone. Only an empty firing position remained, the brass casing from her single shot still lying on the concrete where it had landed. Lieutenant Drummond stood silent, waiting for direction, for orders, for some indication of what they were supposed to do with this information. Foss spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind. She's a liability. Drummond frowned, not understanding. Sir, if she testifies, she'll burn half the chain of command. That's why she's here. Someone's trying to bury her, make her fail a qualification, document instability, create a paper trail that destroys her credibility before she can speak. The words hung heavy between them. Drummond's face showed his struggle to process the implications, the realization that what they had just witnessed was not a test, but a trap, and that trap had just spectacularly failed. But she made the shot, Drummond said, almost to himself. She made the most impressive shot anyone here has ever seen. Foss turned away from the rail, his shoulders heavy with the weight of understanding. Which means they're going to escalate. Have you ever witnessed someone being set up to fail, only to watch them succeed beyond anyone's imagination? If you've seen quiet competence overcome loud doubt, share that story in the comments below. And if you want to see how this unfolds, consider subscribing, because what happened next would prove that some people cannot be broken, no matter how hard the system tries. The base seemed quieter the next morning, though the rhythm of operations continued unchanged. Helicopters crossed overhead in formations. Trainees ran in cadence along the perimeter roads. The Pacific remained indifferent beyond the chain-link fencing, its waves breaking with the same eternal pattern they had followed for millennia. But something had shifted in the spaces between the noise, in the glances exchanged between personnel who had witnessed what happened on the range. Sloan reported to the administration building at 0600 as instructed. The email had arrived on her temporary account sometime after midnight, terse and official. Report for continuation of evaluation process. Building 7, room 204. No explanation, no context, just the expectation of compliance. She climbed the stairs with the same measured pace she brought to everything, her boots making soft sounds on the linoleum that had been buffed to a dull shine by decades of military footsteps. The hallway smelled of floor wax and recycled air. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the flat illumination that made every military building in the world look identical. Room 204 was a conference space with a long table and chairs that had seen better years. Lieutenant Drummond waited inside, standing near the window with his back to the door. He turned when she entered, and something in his expression suggested he had not slept well. Ms. Rivere, he gestured to a chair. Please sit. She remained standing. What's this about, Lieutenant? Drummond hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Admiral Foss has requested additional evaluation protocols. Given yesterday's performance, he wants a more comprehensive assessment of your current capabilities. I completed the qualification. You did. Exceptionally. Drummond looked down at the folder in his hands, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. But there are concerns about whether the standard qualification adequately measures readiness for reinstatement to active duty in specialized roles. Sloan understood immediately. The impossible shot had not freed her. It had made her more dangerous to whatever plan was unfolding. They could not discredit her skill now, so they would change the parameters, raise the bar, create new opportunities for documented failure. When? She asked. Tomorrow morning. 0700. Same range, different scenario. What scenario? You'll be briefed on site. Drummond finally looked at her directly. Ms. Rivere, I want you to know that not everyone agrees with how this is being handled. She studied him for a moment, this young officer caught between orders and conscience. But you'll follow your orders anyway. It was not a question. Drummond's silence was answer enough. That afternoon, Sloan walked the perimeter of the base, keeping to the designated paths, but taking the long route that skirted the ocean side of the facility. The wind carried salt spray that left a fine mist on her face. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and plaintive. She had learned long ago that movement helped her think, that the rhythm of walking allowed her mind to process problems that seemed insurmountable when sitting still. She had been naive to think one perfect shot would be enough. The system she was fighting operated on different principles than individual merit. It ran on institutional momentum, on the need to protect those higher up the chain of command, on the calculus that determined one operator's career was expendable if it meant avoiding larger scandals. The recording she had made of the operational brief for Operation Ember Lake sat in a secure location known only to her and the Inspector General's office. In it, voices she could identify gave orders based on intelligence that did not match protocol. The authorization codes were wrong. The verification procedures were skipped. Someone had wanted Dr. Ibarra dead, and they had used her team to accomplish it while maintaining plausible deniability. If that recording became public, if it was played in a courtroom or a congressional hearing, careers would end. Officers she had once respected would face courts-martial. The carefully maintained fiction that special operations were conducted with perfect oversight and accountability would crack open to reveal something messier and more human underneath. They could not allow that, which meant they could not allow her to maintain credibility as a witness. The qualification had been designed to break her, to create documentation of failure that would poison any future testimony. Her success yesterday had been unexpected, but it did not change their fundamental objective. They would simply adjust their approach. The question was how far they would go. She found Master Chief Creel in one of the equipment maintenance bays, personally inspecting rifle cleaning kits that junior personnel had prepared for the next training cycle. He looked up when she entered, but did not stop his work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency through the organized chaos of brushes and patches and solvent bottles. Rivere. His voice carried no surprise at her appearance. "Master Chief, heard you're up for advanced assessment tomorrow. Word travels fast. Always does." He set down the cleaning kit he had been inspecting and finally gave her his full attention. "You know what they're doing, right?" "I have suspicions." Creel wiped his hands on a rag that had probably been white once, but now bore the permanent stains of gun oil and carbon residue. "They can't beat you on skill, so they'll beat you on conditions. Stack every variable against you, then document your performance under compromised circumstances and call it an objective evaluation." Sloane nodded slowly. She had reached the same conclusion. "The ammunition will be wrong," Creel continued. "Different grain weight, maybe different manufacturer, stuff you haven't zeroed for. Wind flags will be removed or repositioned to give false readings. Your spotting equipment will malfunction in ways that seem like normal gear failure. And if you complain, if you object, that goes in the report too. Evidence of inability to adapt, lack of mental flexibility. So what do I do?" Creel looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "What you always do, adapt and overcome. Be so good they can't explain it away." He returned to his work, the conversation apparently over. But as Sloane turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Revere, that shot yesterday. The flame at 1,700 meters." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I've been doing this for 32 years. I've trained some of the best shooters this country has ever produced. That shot was something different. That was art." She waited, sensing there was more. "Makes me wonder what else you can do that isn't in any file." Sloane left without responding. Some questions did not need answers. The sun was setting when she returned to her temporary quarters, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she had been in the frame of mind to appreciate beauty. The room was small and institutional, identical to 1,000 other temporary billeting spaces on military bases around the world. Narrow bed with tightly tucked corners, small desk, single window with blinds that never quite closed completely. A bathroom with a mirror that had seen too many faces to reflect any of them clearly. She sat on the bed and field-stripped her rifle for the third time that day, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind worked through contingencies. If they gave her wrong ammunition, she could compensate if she had time to fire test rounds and measure the deviation. If they removed wind flags, she could read the mirage and watch the vegetation at the target line. If they sabotaged her equipment, she could rely on fundamental skills that predated any technology. But if they altered multiple variables simultaneously while denying her any chance to adapt, even her skill had limits. The sun disappeared below the horizon. The room darkened. She reassembled the rifle and returned it to its case, then lay back on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling that countless others had stared at before her. Sleep would come, or it would not. Either way, morning would arrive with its own demands. 0700 found her back at the range. The morning air carried a chill that had not been present the day before, and clouds gathered on the western horizon, promising weather changes that would complicate everything. A different group of observers populated the observation deck, though Admiral Foss remained a constant presence, watching from his elevated position like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. The range officer who briefed her was a staff sergeant she had not met before, his manner professional but distant. Advanced field assessment, 12 targets, multiple ranges and conditions, 60 seconds from first shot to last. You'll engage reactive pop-ups, movers, and partially obscured objectives. Urban simulation protocols apply. Sloane listened carefully, noting what was said and what was not said. The targets would appear unpredictably. The timing would be compressed. The scenarios would simulate the chaos of real-world operations where perfect conditions never existed and hesitation meant failure. "What ammunition?" she asked. The staff sergeant handed her 3 magazines. "Standard issue, loaded this morning." She checked them. The rounds were factory loads, not the hand-loaded match ammunition that competitive shooters and snipers typically used. Factory rounds were reliable, but showed greater variation in velocity and accuracy. More importantly, they were not the ammunition she had used to zero her rifle. Every change in ammunition meant a change in point of impact, sometimes subtle, sometimes significant. Wind flags? Removed for this exercise. You'll need to rely on other indicators. Of course they were. Sloan scanned the range, noting the placement of vegetation that might show wind direction and the heat shimmer rising from the ground that could reveal air movement. Workable, but far from ideal. Spotting scope? The staff sergeant pointed to a scope set up beside the firing position. Sloan checked it and immediately saw the problem. The reticle was loose, drifting when the scope was moved. Useless for making accurate calls on distant targets. She said nothing. Objections would be noted as complaints. Complaints would become evidence of inflexibility. "Any questions?" the staff sergeant asked. "No, Sergeant." "Then take your position. You'll begin on my command." Sloan moved to the firing line and settled in behind her rifle. Through her scope, she could see the target areas, currently empty, but prepared with pop-up mechanisms and moving tracks. The ranges varied from 400 to 900 meters, each distance presenting its own challenges and requiring different holds and leads. On the observation deck, Admiral Foss leaned on the rail, his posture suggesting confidence that this time the outcome would be different. Lieutenant Drummond stood beside him, tablet in hand, ready to record whatever happened next. Other officers gathered, some with binoculars, others watching monitors that would capture scope footage and timing data. Ensign Locke stood slightly apart from the group, his face troubled. He had spent most of the previous evening reviewing Sloan's file, reading operation reports that made his own service seem trivial by comparison. He did not understand why someone with her record was being subjected to what amounted to hazing, but he understood enough to know that objecting would accomplish nothing except damage to his own career. The staff sergeant's voice carried across the range. "Shooter ready?" "Ready," Sloan confirmed. "Stand by." She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate, entering that state of heightened awareness where time seemed to stretch and every detail became sharp and significant. The first target would likely appear at middle range, designed to establish a baseline before throwing harder challenges. She would need to maintain perfect efficiency, no wasted motion between targets, no hesitation that would eat into her 60-second window. Begin. The first target popped up at 500 meters. Sloan's shot broke almost before her conscious mind registered the appearance. The target fell. A mover crossed left to right at 600 meters. She led it, compensating for movement and wind, and sent the second round downrange. The target stopped moving, registering the hit. Target 3 appeared partially obscured at 700 meters, only a small portion visible behind simulated cover. She placed the shot where anatomy dictated a vital area would be. The target indicated a successful hit. She was moving through the course with mechanical efficiency, her brain processing information faster than thought, her body executing actions before conscious decision. This was the state that all elite operators sought, where training became instinct and instinct became perfection. Target 4, 5, 6, ranges varying, conditions shifting as the morning wind began to pick up. The factory ammunition showed its inconsistencies, grouping slightly different from her 0, but she adjusted on the fly, reading each impact and making corrections for the next shot. 40 seconds gone, 6 targets down, 6 remaining. Target 7 appeared at 400 meters, close enough that the wrong ammunition mattered less, but requiring a faster transition from her previous firing position. She made the adjustment and took the shot. The target fell. Target 8 was a mover at 800 meters, traveling faster than the earlier mover, crossing through wind that was no longer consistent. She watched it, let her subconscious calculate the lead and the wind drift, and squeezed the trigger. During a moment she could not have explained if asked. The target registered the hit. 50 seconds, 4 targets left. 10 seconds remaining. The final 4 targets appeared nearly simultaneously, requiring her to prioritize and engage. In rapid succession, she chose her order based on difficulty and distance, starting with the farthest and working closer. Each shot flowed into the next with minimal pause. The rifle's bolt worked smoothly despite the rapid pace. Brass ejected in a brass cascade that caught the morning light. The final shot broke with 2 seconds remaining on the clock. 12 targets, 12 hits, 0 misses. Silence descended on the range like a physical force. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was waiting to see how the observers would respond to what had just occurred. On the observation deck, the staff reviewing the monitors looked at each other with expressions mixing disbelief and something approaching awe. Admiral Foss grabbed the nearest tablet and began reviewing the footage himself, scrubbing through each shot, looking for some error or borderline call that could diminish what had just happened. He found nothing. Every shot was clean. Every impact was in the designated target area. The timing was not just within the 60-second limit, but completed with time to spare despite conditions that should have forced mistakes. Lieutenant Drummond stood frozen, his own tablet forgotten in his hands. He had helped design this scenario specifically to create difficulty, to push any shooter to the edge of their capability and likely beyond. The compressed timeline alone should have forced errors. The removed wind flag should have caused misses at the longer ranges. The compromised ammunition should have introduced enough uncertainty to create problems. Sloane had made it look routine. She cleared her weapon and stood, her expression unchanged from when she had begun. No smile of victory, no visible relief. She had been given a task. She had completed it. Her face revealed nothing about the mental and physical effort required to perform under deliberately sabotaged conditions. Admiral Foss set down the tablet with controlled precision, his jaw working as he processed the implications. He had escalated the difficulty, stacked the variables, created conditions designed to document failure. Instead, he had documented perfection that would be impossible to explain away or minimize. The woman standing on his range had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in his experience, and he had done it in front of witnesses, on camera, with data that could not be altered or denied. Master Chief Creel appeared at the range level, walking towards Sloane with measured steps. His face was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested satisfaction. He stopped a respectful distance away and spoke quietly, though his words carried in the morning stillness. "That was a facility record, Revere. Might be a Navy record, definitely going in the books." "Thank you, Master Chief." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once and walked away. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight for anyone who understood the culture. Master Chief Boone Creel did not give praise lightly. His acknowledgement was a statement that resonated more than any official commendation. Sloane began gathering her gear, breaking down her rifle, and stowing it in its case with the same care she had shown every other time. Around her, the range slowly returned to activity, though conversations were muted and glances kept drifting her direction. She had become something other than just another candidate. She had become a question that no one knew how to answer. The morning advanced toward noon. Sloane returned to her temporary quarters, cleaned her weapon thoroughly, and changed into fresh fatigues. She had no further orders, no indication of what would come next. So she waited, because waiting was something she had learned to do with the same patience she brought to everything else. The summons came at 1400 hours, not an email this time, but two men in civilian clothes appearing at her door, with identification that marked them as federal agents. Their suits were unremarkable. Their manner was professional, but carried an edge that suggested they were accustomed to compliance. "Ms. Revere, you need to come with us." "On whose authority?" The first agent, older with gray at his temples, held up credentials that bore seals she recognized. "Inspector General's office. You're being recalled for testimony." Something cold settled in Sloane's chest. The timing was not coincidental. Someone had been watching her performance, had seen that the attempts to discredit her were failing, and had decided to pull her off the board entirely. Whether this was protective custody or something else remained to be seen. "Am I under arrest?" "No, but your presence has been requested immediately." She glanced past them to where a black SUV waited in the parking area, its engine running, its windows tinted dark enough to prevent anyone seeing inside. This was not a request she could decline. These men had authority that superseded anything Admiral Foss or anyone else on this base could counter. "Let me get my gear." "That won't be necessary. Everything you need will be provided." Which meant they did not intend for her to return. Sloane looked around the small room that had been her home for the past few days. At the rifle case propped in the corner, at the few personal items she had brought with her. Walking away from them felt wrong, felt like abandoning part of herself. But she had no choice. She stepped into the hallway and followed the agents toward the stairs. They had descended one flight when Master Chief Creel appeared from a side corridor, moving to intercept their path. He positioned himself directly in front of the agents, his body language making clear that getting past him would require either conversation or confrontation. "She's still under evaluation," Creel stated, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. The older agent showed no intimidation. Not anymore. She's been recalled to Washington. By who? That's classified. She's Navy personnel, on a Navy base, under Navy orders. And now she's under federal orders that supersede yours. The agent's tone remained professional but implacable. Step aside, Master Chief. Creel held his position for another moment, his eyes moving from the agents to Sloan and back again. Whatever calculation he was making played out behind his weathered features. Finally, he shifted slightly, creating a narrow path. But as Sloan passed him, he spoke quietly. His words meant only for her. Stay sharp. Don't trust anyone who doesn't have scars. Then she was moving down the stairs again, the agents flanking her, their presence both protective and confining. They emerged into the afternoon sunlight and crossed to the waiting SUV. One agent opened the rear door. Sloan climbed inside, the leather seat cold despite the warmth of the day. The vehicle pulled away from the building, heading toward the main gate. Through the tinted windows, she watched the base slide past, familiar structures becoming distant and then disappearing entirely as they turned onto the main road. Other personnel went about their duties, unaware that anything significant had just occurred, their routines undisturbed by her departure. On the observation deck of the firing range building, Admiral Foss watched the black SUV exit the gate and merge into civilian traffic. Lieutenant Drummond stood beside him, waiting for direction, for orders, for some indication of what they were supposed to do now. Foss's voice was quiet, almost to himself. This isn't over. Sir, someone just removed our problem, but they also removed our ability to control the narrative. He turned from the window, his expression troubled. Find out where they're taking her. Who authorized the recall? Everything. Sir, if it's IG related, we might not have access to that information. Then find someone who does. Foss headed toward his office, his stride carrying the tension of a man who had just lost control of a situation he thought he understood. And pull her full file, everything we couldn't access before. I want to know exactly who we just had on our range. Drummond returned to his office and began making calls, navigating the bureaucratic maze of military information systems. Most of his inquiries hit dead ends or classification barriers, but eventually, through a combination of persistence and calling in favors from Academy classmates now scattered through various commands, he began piecing together a more complete picture. Sloan Revere's record was extraordinary. Her deployment history read like a catalog of every major special operations theater from the past decade. She had been part of operations that were never publicly acknowledged, working with units whose existence was classified, accomplishing missions that would never appear in any official history. The numbers told part of the story. 47 confirmed. Operations. Hundreds of hours in hostile territory. Dozens of high-value targets eliminated, with the kind of precision that prevented collateral damage and kept missions from becoming diplomatic incidents. But it was the personal details that made Drummond's hands shake slightly as he read. She had pulled wounded teammates from ambush sites under fire, had remained in position for 72 hours without relief during a critical surveillance operation, had volunteered for assignments that other operators declined because the risk exceeded any reasonable calculation. And then Operation Ember Lake had ended it all. One mission. One target who turned out to be on the wrong side of a bureaucratic intelligence failure. One shot that was perfect in execution, but disastrous in consequence. The report noted that Revere had recorded the operational brief, a violation of protocol that would normally result in severe disciplinary action. But the recording had revealed something worse than a breach of procedure. It had shown that the intelligence supporting the operation was compromised, that someone in the chain of command had either been catastrophically negligent or deliberately deceptive. An investigation was ongoing. Multiple officers were under scrutiny, and Sloan Revere, the shooter who had followed orders and then had the conscience to question them, had become the key witness whose testimony could determine careers and possibly result in criminal charges. Drummond compiled his findings into a report and delivered it to Admiral Foss's office. The Admiral read in silence, his face becoming progressively more grave. When he finished, he set the papers aside and sat back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "We weren't testing her," he said quietly. "We were trying to silence her." Drummond said nothing. The conclusion was obvious now, with the benefit of complete information that should have been available from the beginning. And we failed. Foss looked older suddenly, the weight of realization pressing down on him. Worse, we documented her superiority. Every test we threw at her, she exceeded. We built a record that proves she's one of the most capable operators in naval special warfare. Sir, I don't think we had all the relevant information when we began this evaluation process. No, we didn't. We were given a narrative and we accepted it. Foss stood and moved to the window, looking out at the range where Sloane had performed her impossible feats. Someone very high up wanted her credibility destroyed. They used us to do it, and we went along without asking the right questions. What do we do now? Foss was silent for a long time. The sun continued its arc across the sky. The base continued its operations. The world turned with indifference to the small dramas of individual conscience. We document the truth, Foss finally said. Every test, every score, every exceptional performance. We make sure that whatever happens next, the record shows exactly how capable she is. If someone tries to bury her, they'll have to explain why someone of her caliber is being sidelined. He turned back to Drummond, and his expression carried a determination that had been absent before. And we start asking questions about who gave the orders to evaluate her this way. Because if they're willing to burn an operator this good to protect themselves, what else are they willing to do? The black SUV carrying Sloane merged onto the interstate, heading north toward the airport. Inside, she sat in silence, watching California landscape blur past. The agents did not speak to her, did not explain where exactly they were taking her, or what would happen when they arrived. Their silence was its own message. She was a package being delivered, a problem being relocated, a witness being secured. She thought about the rifle she had left behind, the gear she had accumulated over years of service, the few personal items that connected her to a life that seemed increasingly distant. All of it was replaceable except the memories, and those could not be taken no matter how hard anyone tried. The vehicle slowed as it approached the airport, taking an exit that bypassed the main terminals and headed toward a section reserved for private aviation. The agents remained silent as they pulled up to a small jet waiting on the tarmac, its engines already running, stairs deployed in anticipation of immediate departure. This way, Ms. Revere. She climbed out of the SUV and walked toward the aircraft, the agents flanking her like an honor guard or an escort for the condemned. The stairs were steep and narrow. The interior of the jet was configured for utility rather than comfort, with facing seats and minimal amenities. No windows offered views of the world passing below. The agents did not board. They simply stood at the base of the stairs until she was inside, then one of them reached up and pulled the stairs closed, sealing her into the aircraft. Through the small window in the door, she watched them return to their vehicle and drive away. A pilot appeared from the cockpit, his expression professionally neutral. "We'll be wheels up in 5 minutes. There's water in the galley if you need it. Flight time is approximately 5 hours. Where are we going?" "Washington." He disappeared back into the cockpit without further explanation. Sloane found a seat and buckled in. The engines increased their pitch. The aircraft began to move, taxiing toward the runway with the efficiency of a flight that had priority clearance. Within minutes, they were accelerating down the runway, the force pressing her back into the seat as the nose lifted and the ground fell away. She watched through the small window as California became smaller and then disappeared beneath cloud cover. Somewhere down there, people were continuing the investigation into Operation Ember Lake. Files were being reviewed. Statements were being compared. The machinery of military justice was grinding forward with the inexorable momentum of bureaucracy that had been set in motion and could not be easily stopped. And somewhere in that machinery, her testimony would be the pivot point that determined which way everything fell. The flight stretched into hours. The pilot made no announcements. No one else appeared from the cockpit. Sloane sat in the pressurized silence, alone with thoughts that circled like the aircraft must be circling before beginning its descent. She thought about the flame she had extinguished at 1,100 meters. That single shot had changed everything, had proven what she was capable of, in a way that could not be denied or explained away. But it had also made her more dangerous to people who needed her to be less than she was. The irony was not lost on her. By succeeding so spectacularly, she had guaranteed that the attempts to neutralize her would escalate. Excellence had made her a target rather than protected her. The aircraft began its descent as the sun approached the western horizon. Through the window, she could see lights beginning to appear below, the sprawl of the capital spreading in all directions. This city was where decisions were made that rippled through every military base and operational theater in the world. Careers were built and destroyed here. Policies were written that determined who lived and who died, in places most civilians would never hear about. And now she was being delivered into the heart of it, a witness carrying knowledge that powerful people wanted buried. The landing was smooth. The aircraft taxied to another private terminal, this one surrounded by security fencing and patrolled by personnel whose weapons and body language suggested they were prepared for threats that commercial terminals never considered. Another black SUV waited on the tarmac, different agents this time, but the same professional manner, the same implacable courtesy that was not quite courtesy. They escorted her off the aircraft and into the vehicle without conversation. The sun had set during the descent, and darkness covered the city as they drove through streets she did not recognize toward a destination she had not been told. The SUV eventually pulled into an underground parking garage, descending multiple levels until they reached a section that required security clearances to access. The agents led her to an elevator that required both a keycard and a biometric scan. The elevator descended further, going deeper underground than seemed necessary for any normal government building. When the doors opened, she found herself in a corridor that could have been in any secure facility anywhere in the world. Fluorescent lights, neutral paint, doors with small windows and card readers. The artificial environment of a place designed to exist, separate from the world above. One of the agents gestured to a door. Through there, someone will be with you shortly. Sloane entered a room that was part office, part interrogation space. A table, chairs on both sides. Recording equipment mounted in the corners. A mirror that was almost certainly one-way glass. She had been in rooms like this before, though usually on the other side of the questions. She sat and waited. Minutes passed. Then the door opened and a woman entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing the kind of conservative suit that suggested legal training and government service. She was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and the posture of someone accustomed to authority. Ms. Rivere, I'm Deputy Inspector General Catherine Milliner. Thank you for coming. I was given the impression I didn't have a choice. Milliner's expression flickered with something that might have been amusement or acknowledgement. Let's say your testimony is important enough that we wanted to ensure you were available to provide it. She set the folder on the table and opened it, revealing pages of documents and photographs that Sloane recognized as relating to Operation Ember Lake. You recorded the operational brief for Operation Ember Lake. You submitted that recording to this office 3 weeks ago. We've been investigating the circumstances around that operation ever since. And what we've found suggests systemic failures at multiple levels of command, compartmented intelligence that was improperly handled, authorization protocols that were circumvented, chain of custody issues with mission orders. Milliner's voice was clinical, but something in her eyes suggested anger carefully controlled. Someone wanted Dr. Ibarra dead, and they used your team to accomplish it while ensuring that if anything went wrong, the blame would fall on operational personnel rather than command staff. Sloane had suspected as much, but hearing it stated so directly made something cold settle in her stomach. Who? That's what we're trying to determine. The recording you provided is evidence, but it's not sufficient on its own. We need your testimony about everything you observed before, during, and after the operation. Details that might not seem significant, but could help us establish a complete picture. And the officers involved? 3 are currently suspended pending the outcome of our investigation. 2 more are under scrutiny but remain in their positions. If we can build a strong enough case, there will be courts-martial. Milliner paused. But that depends significantly on you. Your credibility as a witness. Your ability to testify clearly about what happened. Which is why someone tried to destroy my credibility at Coronado. We suspected as much. The evaluation you underwent there was not standard protocol. Someone with influence arranged for you to be put through scenarios designed to document failure. They failed. Yes, we received reports about your performance. Quite remarkable, actually. Milliner closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Which brings me to why you're here. We're moving forward with the investigation. Within the next 2 weeks, formal charges will be filed. You'll be called to testify before a military tribunal. Until then, you'll be kept in protective custody. Protective? Your testimony threatens careers of very powerful people, Ms. Rivere. People with resources and connections. We cannot guarantee your safety if you remain in normal channels, so you'll stay here in secure facilities until the proceedings begin. Sloane looked around the sterile room, understanding finally clicking into place. This was not temporary. This was indefinite detention, dressed up as protection. She was being locked away not to keep her safe, but to keep her isolated and controlled until the moment her testimony was needed. And if I refuse? Milliner's expression hardened slightly. Then you'll be subpoenaed and held as a material witness. The result will be the same, but the accommodations will be less comfortable. Your choice. It was not really a choice. It was the illusion of agency in a situation where all the real decisions had already been made. Sloane had seen this pattern before, the way institutions protected themselves by controlling information and isolating individuals who threatened the system. What about my gear, my personal effects at Coronado? They'll be retrieved and brought to you. You'll have everything you need. Everything except freedom. Everything except the ability to prepare her own defense or make her own decisions. She would be comfortable and secure and completely powerless until the moment they needed her to speak. Milliner stood, gathering her folder. Someone will show you to your quarters. You'll have access to exercise facilities, a library, basic amenities. If you need anything specific, submit a request through the duty officer. She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. For what it's worth, Ms. Rivere, I believe you did the right thing. Recording that brief, submitting it for investigation. Not everyone would have had the courage. Or the naivety, Sloane replied quietly. Milliner's expression suggested she understood the distinction. Then she was gone, the door closing with a solid click that might have been the sound of a lock engaging. Sloane sat alone in the room, staring at the one-way mirror and wondering who was watching from the other side, what judgments were being made, what future was being decided without her input. She had made an impossible shot that silenced an entire base. She had performed flawlessly under compromised conditions designed to break her. She had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in the official record, and none of it mattered. None of it had protected her or given her control over her own fate. Excellence had only made her valuable as a witness, a tool to be used and then set aside when her purpose was served. The door opened again, and a different person entered, this one in military police uniform, his manner polite, but impersonal. Ma'am, if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters. Sloane stood and followed him out into the corridor, deeper into the underground facility that would be her home for however long it took the machinery of justice to grind through its processes. The corridors were identical, the doors numbered, but otherwise unmarked. She lost track of the turns, could not have retraced the route back to the elevator, even if she had wanted to try. Finally, they stopped at a door that looked exactly like all the others. The MP used a key card to unlock it, then handed her a card of her own. Your quarters, ma'am. The card will give you access to designated areas of the facility. If you try to access restricted areas, security will respond. Any questions? When can I leave? That's above my level, ma'am. You'll need to discuss that with Deputy Inspector General Milliner. He left her standing in the doorway. The room beyond was larger than she expected, furnished with a bed, desk, small sitting area, and attached bathroom. A window showed a view that her brain initially tried to process as real, before realizing it was a high-definition screen displaying a recorded image of sky and trees, the illusion of normalcy in a place designed to be anything but. Sloane entered and the door closed behind her, with that same solid click. She set her key card on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days settling over her like a physical presence. She had thought that performing with excellence would be enough, that if she was undeniably good, the system would have to recognize and respect her ability. But she understood now that the system operated on different principles entirely. Excellence was only valued when it served institutional needs. When it threatened those needs, when it revealed uncomfortable truths or challenged convenient narratives, it became something to be controlled and contained. The screen on the wall cycled through its recorded day. Clouds moving across artificial sky, light changing to simulate passage of time that had no connection to actual time in this underground space where day and night were whatever the facility determined them to be. Somewhere above, in the real world with real sky, Admiral Foss was writing reports that documented her capabilities. Master Chief Creel was probably drinking coffee and thinking about the operators he had trained over 3 decades. Lieutenant Drummond was perhaps questioning the orders he had followed and the easy assumptions he had made. And somewhere in offices with windows that showed actual sky, powerful people were calculating how much her testimony would cost them and what they might do to minimize that cost. Sloane lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, counting the acoustic tiles and wondering how long it would be before she saw real sunlight again, before she stood at a firing line with wind in her face and a target downrange that existed for no purpose other than to be hit. The answer, she suspected, would be longer than anyone had told her, because in this place, in this system, timelines were flexible and promises were made with fingers crossed behind backs. She was valuable now. She was needed. But after her testimony was given, after she had served her purpose, what then? The question had no answer she could calculate. So she did what she had learned to do in every impossible situation she had ever faced. She controlled what she could control, her thoughts, her discipline, her readiness for whatever came next. And she waited, because waiting was just another kind of operation, another test of patience and endurance that she had been preparing for her entire career. The artificial window showed stars now, countless points of light against digital darkness, beautiful and completely false. Like so many things in the world, she had dedicated herself to serving. Somewhere in the facility, someone was watching monitors that showed her room. Someone was making notes about her behavior. Someone was assessing whether she would be compliant or difficult, whether she could be trusted or needed additional control. Let them watch, she thought. Let them make their assessments. In the end, they would put her in front of a tribunal and ask her questions, and she would tell the truth with the same precision she brought to every shot she had ever taken. That was the only target that mattered now. Not flames at impossible distances, not scenarios designed to manufacture failure, just truth, spoken clearly, consequences be damned. It was the only shot she had left. Have you ever done the right thing only to be punished for it? If you've sacrificed for truth and watched the system try to bury you, share your story in the comments. And if you want to see how this ends, hit subscribe, because what happens next will prove that some people cannot be silenced, no matter how deep they're buried. The days in the underground facility blurred together in a way that only artificial environments could achieve. Without natural light to mark the passage of time, without weather or seasons or any of the countless small variations that define normal existence, Sloane found herself existing in a state of suspended animation. She woke when the facility determined it was morning. She ate meals that arrived on schedules she had not chosen. She exercised in a small gym that never changed temperature or humidity, regardless of how hard she worked. The only variable was her own discipline, and she clung to it the way a drowning person clings to debris. She maintained her routines, physical training every morning, mental rehearsal of testimony every afternoon, reading in the evenings from a library that consisted mostly of technical manuals and outdated magazines, anything to keep her mind sharp and her body ready for whatever came next. Deputy Inspector General Milliner visited, periodically, always with new questions, always probing for details that might strengthen the case against the officers under investigation. She was professional and thorough, treating Sloane with the careful respect accorded to someone who was simultaneously valuable and potentially volatile. "Tell me again about the briefing room," Milliner would say, tablet open and stylus poised. "Who was present? What exactly was said about the verification protocols?" And Sloane would walk through it again, her memory precise, because precision was how she had survived years of operations, where missing a detail meant mission failure or worse. She described the faces around the briefing table, the tone in voices when certain questions were deflected, the way authorization codes were displayed on screens for only moments before being cleared, as if to avoid creating records that might later be scrutinized. "The senior operations officer," Sloane said during one session. "He was uncomfortable with something. I could see it in his posture. He started to raise an objection about the target identification protocols, then stopped himself. Do you know why he stopped? Someone higher in the chain cut him off, told him the intelligence had been verified through appropriate channels. But the way it was said, it felt like a warning rather than reassurance." Milliner made notes. "This officer, the one who was uncomfortable, he's one of the 3 currently suspended. His testimony corroborates yours on several key points. Will he testify? If we can guarantee his career survives it, yes. If he thinks he'll be sacrificed to protect people above him, probably not. Milliner looked up from her tablet. That's why your testimony is so crucial. You have nothing left to lose. They've already tried to destroy your credibility and failed. You're the witness who can't be compromised. Sloane understood the logic, even as she recognized how it positioned her. She was valuable precisely because she had already paid the price that others feared paying. Her sacrifice had already been made, which freed her to tell truths that would cost others everything. 2 weeks became 3. 3 became 4. The timeline kept shifting, always with plausible explanations. Additional evidence needed to be gathered. Witness statements required coordination. Legal procedures demanded careful preparation. Sloane listened to these explanations and recognized them for what they were: the bureaucratic machinery that ground slowly but inexorably toward conclusions that had likely already been determined. She was in the exercise facility when Lieutenant Drummond appeared, escorted by security, but looking decidedly out of place in the underground environment. He waited until she finished her set before approaching, his expression mixing discomfort and determination. "Ms. Revere, I wasn't sure they'd let me see you." Sloane set down the weights and grabbed a towel. "Lieutenant, what brings you to my luxurious accommodations?" "Admiral Foss sent me. He wanted you to know that your gear has been properly stored and inventoried. Everything will be returned to you when you're released." "When, not if." "Optimistic." Drummond shifted his weight, clearly struggling with something he wanted to say but was not sure how to express. "There's more. The Admiral wanted me to tell you that he's submitted a formal commendation for your performance during the qualification exercises, the flame shot and the advanced assessment. He's recommending you for recognition at the highest level. Recognition from the man who tried to make me fail." How generous. "He didn't know, Ms. Revere. None of us knew who you really were or what you'd done. We were given a narrative and we accepted it without question. That was wrong." Sloane studied him, seeing genuine regret in his young face. "What narrative were you given?" "That you were potentially unstable, that the events of Operation Ember Lake had raised questions about your judgment and reliability, that the evaluation was necessary to determine if you were fit for continued service." Drummond met her eyes. "We should have dug deeper, should have asked more questions. We didn't, and I'm sorry." The apology was unexpected and possibly meaningless in the larger context, but Sloane recognized the courage it took for him to come here and offer it. "How much trouble are you in for visiting me?" "Probably quite a bit, but Admiral Foss felt it was important that you know you have support, that not everyone believes you should be kept down here like a prisoner." "I'm not a prisoner. I'm a protected witness. There's apparently a difference, though I'm having trouble identifying what it is." A security officer appeared at the entrance to the gym, making a subtle gesture that indicated Drummond's time was ending. He nodded acknowledgement, then looked back at Sloane. "For whatever it's worth, that shot you made, the flame at 1,700 meters, people are still talking about it. It's become something of a legend already. Master Chief Creel says it's the best single shot he's seen in 32 years. Tell the Master Chief I appreciate that, and tell Admiral Foss that his commendation, while noted, won't change what I'm going to testify to." "He knows. He said to tell you that's exactly why he's submitting it, because you deserve recognition regardless of what happens next." Drummond was escorted out, leaving Sloane alone in the gym with machines that never wore out and mirrors that reflected a woman who looked progressively more like a caged animal despite her best efforts to maintain discipline and composure. That evening, Deputy Inspector General Milliner arrived with news that the timeline had finally solidified. The tribunal would convene in 3 days. Formal charges had been filed against 3 officers, with 2 additional officers named as persons of interest in the investigation. Sloane's testimony would be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. 3 days to prepare, Sloane said. Generous. "You've been preparing for weeks. The testimony itself will be straightforward. Just answer the questions truthfully and completely. Don't speculate about things you don't have direct knowledge of. Stay focused on what you personally observed and experienced. And after you testify, we'll assess the security situation and determine when it's safe for you to return to normal duty status. Which could be never, if powerful people decide I'm too much of a liability to have operating freely." Milliner's expression showed that she understood the concern. "The system isn't perfect, Ms. Revere. But it's still better than the alternative. Without people willing to step forward and testify, without consequences for misconduct, we'd have no accountability at all. Cold comfort when you're the one being buried to maintain that accountability. You're not being buried, you're being protected so you can speak truth. There's a difference. Everyone keeps telling me that. I'm starting to wonder who they're trying to convince. Milliner gathered her materials and stood. 3 days. Rest. Prepare mentally. And remember that what you're doing matters, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. After she left, Sloane sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the artificial window with its recorded sky. 3 days until she would finally have the opportunity to speak publicly about what had happened, to lay out the truth of Operation Ember Lake in a forum where people would be forced to listen. 3 days until she discovered whether her sacrifice had meant anything, or whether the system would find ways to minimize and deflect and protect its own. She thought about the flame she had extinguished at impossible distance, how that single perfect shot had changed everything while ultimately changing nothing at all. She was still here, still isolated, still waiting for others to decide her fate, based on calculations that had little to do with justice and everything to do with institutional preservation. But she had made that shot. That was undeniable, and she would give her testimony with the same precision, the same unwavering commitment to getting it exactly right. That was all she could control. The 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Sloane rehearsed her testimony until she could recite it in her sleep. She reviewed the recording she had made of the operational brief, listening to voices she recognized giving orders that still made her stomach tight with anger and betrayal. She prepared herself mentally for the hostility she would face, the attempts to discredit her, the questions designed to confuse rather than clarify. On the morning of the tribunal, security personnel arrived early to escort her. She dressed in her service uniform, the first time she had worn it since arriving at the facility. The ribbons on her chest told stories of deployment and achievement, though they represented only a fraction of what she had actually done. Most of her real service existed in files so classified that even the fact of their classification was classified. The tribunal was being held in a secure conference facility on a military base outside the city. The drive took 40 minutes through morning traffic, the SUV's tinted windows preventing anyone from seeing in while allowing Sloane to watch the world she had been separated from. People went to work. Children waited at bus stops. Life continued with complete indifference to the small drama of accountability unfolding in spaces they would never know existed. The conference facility was modern and sterile, all glass and steel and security checkpoints. Sloane was processed through multiple screening points before being taken to a waiting room adjacent to the main hearing chamber. Through the wall, she could hear voices, the sound of people taking their seats, the shuffle and murmur of official proceedings beginning. Deputy Inspector General Milliner appeared, looking crisp and professional in a way that suggested she had been preparing for this moment as intensely as Sloane had. Ready? As I'll ever be. Remember, just answer the questions. Don't volunteer information. Don't let them draw you into speculation. Stick to what you know from direct experience. I've testified before. Not like this. Not with this much at stake. Milliner paused, then added more quietly. There are people in that room who will do everything they can to protect their careers and their colleagues. They'll try to make you look unstable, unreliable, vindictive. Don't let them rattle you. I've been shot at by people who actually wanted me dead. I think I can handle hostile questions. It's not the same. Bullets are honest. Questions can be weapons designed to wound in ways that don't show. A knock on the door signaled that it was time. Sloane stood, straightened her uniform, and followed Milliner into the hearing chamber. The room was larger than she expected, configured like a courtroom, with a raised bench where 3 senior officers sat in judgment. On one side, a table for the prosecution. On the other, a table for the defense where the accused officers sat with their lawyers. In the gallery, observers filled most available seats, faces she recognized and many she did not. Admiral Foss sat in the back row, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him, Lieutenant Drummond took notes on a tablet. Master Chief Creel occupied a seat along the side wall, his weathered face giving nothing away but his presence alone, sending a message of support. Sloane was directed to the witness stand, a chair positioned to face the panel of judges while remaining visible to everyone in the room. She sat with the posture drilled into her through years of military bearing, back straight, hands resting calmly in her lap, eyes forward. The senior judge, a Navy captain whose ribbons indicated extensive combat experience, opened the proceedings with standard formalities. Then he turned his attention to Sloane. Ms. Rivera, you are here to provide testimony regarding Operation Ember Lake and the circumstances surrounding the elimination of Dr. Anton Ibarra. Do you understand that you are under oath and that false testimony will result in severe legal consequences? I understand, sir. Then let's begin. Please state your name, rank, and current duty assignment for the record. Sloane Elizabeth Rivera. My rank is classified. My current duty assignment is administrative leave pending resolution of this investigation. One of the defense attorneys, a civilian in an expensive suit, immediately stood. Objection. The witness's rank is a matter of public record and relevant to establishing her credibility and authority. The judge considered this. Ms. Rivera, is there a reason your rank is classified? Yes, sir. My service has been conducted under programs that require personnel information to remain compartmented for operational security reasons. The court recognizes that certain operations require confidentiality. However, for purposes of this proceeding, we need to establish your qualifications and authority. Can you provide general information about your role without compromising operational security? Sloane glanced at Milliner, who gave a slight nod of approval. I am a senior sniper and designated marksman assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I have conducted operations across multiple theaters over the past 8 years. Operation Ember Lake was my 47th confirmed mission. The number hung in the air like a challenge. 47 missions. In a room full of military personnel, everyone understood what that meant. This was not someone with limited experience or questionable judgment. This was an operator who had been trusted repeatedly with the most sensitive and dangerous assignments. The prosecution began with straightforward questions designed to establish the timeline of Operation Ember Lake. Sloane walked through it methodically. The intelligence briefing, the target identification, the planning phase, the insertion, the execution. Her answers were precise and factual, offering no interpretation or emotion, just the clinical recitation of events as they had occurred. Then came the critical questions about the irregularities she had noticed. Ms. Rivera, you stated in your initial report that the authorization codes for Operation Ember Lake were non-standard. Can you explain what you mean by that? Every mission requires specific authorization from designated command authority. These authorizations use codes that follow established patterns based on the mission type and classification level. The codes provided for Operation Ember Lake did not follow those patterns. Did you raise this concern during the briefing? I noted it to my team leader. He said the codes had been verified by higher authority and that we were cleared to proceed. But you remained concerned. Yes, enough that I recorded the briefing, which is against standard protocol, but within my authority if I observed potential security violations. The defense attorney was on his feet again. Your Honor, the witness admits to violating operational protocol. This suggests a pattern of insubordination and disregard for chain of command. The judge looked unimpressed. Counsel, the witness has already acknowledged that recording the briefing was irregular. However, regulations also grant operational personnel discretion to document potential security issues. Unless you have evidence that the recording was made for unauthorized purposes, your objection is noted but overruled. The questioning continued for hours. Details about the target dossier. The verification procedures that were supposed to have been followed, but apparently were not. The post-mission intelligence that revealed Dr. Ibarra's true status as a CIA asset. Sloane answered everything with the same steady precision, never wavering, never showing uncertainty. The defense tried multiple approaches to undermine her credibility. They questioned her mental state following the operation. They suggested that her recording of the briefing indicated paranoia rather than proper caution. They implied that her testimony was motivated by desire to deflect blame for a mission that had gone wrong. Sloane responded to each attack with calm factuality. Yes, she had been disturbed when she learned the target was an American asset. No, that had not impaired her judgment or reliability. Yes, she took responsibility for taking the shot, but she had followed orders based on information provided by her chain of command. And if that information was faulty, the fault lay with those who provided it, not with her for executing the mission as briefed. During a break in the proceedings, Milliner appeared at her side with water and quiet encouragement. "You're doing well. They're trying to rattle you, and you're not giving them anything to work with. They're trying to make this about me instead of about who gave the orders. That's their job. Our job is to keep the focus where it belongs, on the people who authorized a mission based on faulty intelligence and compromised procedures." When the tribunal reconvened, the prosecution played the recording Sloan had made. The audio quality was clear, voices easily identifiable. The room listened in silence as the briefing unfolded, hearing the target description, the authorization codes that did not match standard patterns, the questions that were deflected rather than answered. Then came the voice of the senior operations officer, the one who had been uncomfortable, asking about verification protocols. "Sir, the target dossier shows CIA coordination flags. Should we not verify with agency liaison before proceeding?" And the response from someone higher in the chain, cold and dismissive. "The target has been verified through appropriate channels. All necessary coordination has been completed. Your concern is noted, but not relevant to mission execution." The recording ended. The silence in the chamber was profound. One of the judges, a Marine colonel who had been silent through most of the proceedings, leaned forward. "Ms. Rivere, in your professional judgment as an operator with extensive experience, do you believe appropriate verification protocols were followed for Operation Ember Lake?" Sloan met his eyes without hesitation. "No, sir, I do not." "On what basis do you make that assessment?" "The standard protocol for high-value targets requires multi-agency verification, particularly when CIA coordination flags are present in the dossier. That verification creates a paper trail with specific signatures and timestamps. When I requested to see that documentation after the mission, I was told it was unavailable due to classification restrictions. That's not how the system works when procedures are properly followed. So you believe someone deliberately circumvented the verification process? I believe someone wanted Dr. Ibarra eliminated and used my team to do it while ensuring that if the truth came out, the blame would fall on operational personnel rather than command staff." The defense erupted in objections. The judges called for order. But the statement had been made, clear and unambiguous, and everyone in the room understood its implications. The testimony continued into the afternoon, but the critical moment had passed. Sloan had laid out the facts with precision, had demonstrated through the recording and through her own credible testimony that something had been fundamentally wrong with Operation Ember Lake, and had placed the responsibility squarely where it belonged. When she was finally dismissed from the witness stand, she felt the exhaustion of mental effort that was in some ways more draining than physical exertion. She had maintained perfect control, had not allowed emotion to color her answers, had given them nothing they could use to undermine her credibility. She returned to the waiting room, while the tribunal moved to other witnesses. Through the walls, she could hear voices raised in heated discussion. The defense was fighting hard, throwing up every procedural objection and technical argument they could muster. But the recording was damning, and her testimony had been unshakable. Hours later, as the day's proceedings concluded, Deputy Inspector General Milliner found her in the waiting room. "You did well, better than well. You gave them no openings, no weaknesses to exploit. When will they decide?" "The tribunal will deliberate for several days at minimum. This isn't a simple case. There are political implications, career considerations for multiple senior officers. But based on what I saw today, I believe they'll move forward with charges against at least 2 of the 3 suspended officers. And then there will be courts-martial, more testimony, more legal proceedings. But your part is essentially done. You've provided the foundation for accountability." Sloan wanted to feel satisfaction, but found only emptiness where that emotion should have been. She had done what she came to do. She had told the truth with precision and clarity. Whether that truth resulted in justice or merely in more bureaucratic maneuvering was beyond her control. The return trip to the underground facility felt like a retreat rather than a return. She had briefly touched the real world, had spoken her truth in a forum that mattered, and now she was being returned to isolation, while others decided what her testimony meant and what consequences would follow. But something had shifted during the day. As the SUV pulled into the underground garage, as she was processed back through security checkpoints and escorted to her quarters, Sloan felt a weight lifting that she had not fully recognized she was carrying. The testimony was given. The recording was part of official record. The truth was out there now, no longer locked in her memory or stored in secret files, but spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses. They could not unspeak it. They could not make it disappear. Whatever happened next, the truth existed independent of her now, and that mattered in ways she was only beginning to understand. 2 days later, Deputy Inspector General Milliner returned with news. The tribunal had reached preliminary findings. 2 of the 3 suspended officers would face courts-martial on charges of negligence, failure to follow proper protocols, and conduct unbecoming. The 3rd officer, the one who had raised concerns during the briefing, would face administrative discipline, but not criminal charges. The 2 additional officers under investigation would be subjected to further inquiry. "It's not everything," Milliner said, "but it's accountability, real consequences for real failures. That doesn't happen often in these circumstances." "When can I leave?" "Soon. The security assessment is ongoing, but with the major testimony completed and formal charges filed, the threat level is considered reduced. You'll likely be released back to normal duty status within the week." Sloan nodded, not quite believing it until it actually happened. She had learned not to trust timelines or promises in this place, but this time, the timeline held. 5 days after her testimony, she was processed out of the facility with the same efficiency she had been processed in. Her personal effects, including the rifle and gear from Coronado, were returned. Papers were signed, security protocols were reviewed, and then she was standing in actual sunlight for the first time in weeks, blinking against brightness that seemed impossibly intense after so long in artificial illumination. A car waited to take her to the airport. Not an SUV with tinted windows this time, but a normal sedan with a normal driver. The flight back to California was commercial, coach class, surrounded by ordinary travelers who had no idea that the woman in the window seat had just testified in proceedings that would end multiple military careers. Coronado felt different when she returned. The base looked the same, smelled the same, operated with the same rhythms, but something in how people looked at her had changed. Word had spread about her testimony, about the tribunal, about the officers facing courts-martial, and about her role in making it happen. Master Chief Creel found her in the armory where she was checking in her gear. He did not smile, but something in his weathered face suggested satisfaction. "Heard you gave them hell in Washington." "I gave them the truth. Whether it was hell depends on their perspective. 3 officers facing courts-martial, 2 more under investigation. I'd say that qualifies as hell for them." He paused. "Admiral Foss wants to see you, when you're settled." Sloan nodded. She finished her gear check-in and made her way to the administration building, climbing the same stairs she had climbed weeks ago, walking the same hallways that had seemed so institutional and unwelcoming. Admiral Foss's office door was open. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that had been absent during their previous encounters. "Ms. Rivere, thank you for coming." "You wanted to see me, sir." "I did. I wanted to apologize personally for the evaluation process you were subjected to here, for the assumptions I made without adequate information, for treating you as a problem to be managed rather than an operator deserving of respect." The apology was unexpected, and Sloan studied him carefully, trying to determine if it was genuine or merely politic. "I believed a narrative I was given," Foss continued, "that you were potentially unstable, that the evaluation was necessary to protect the integrity of the service. I should have questioned that narrative more carefully, should have looked deeper into who you actually were and what you had actually done. My failure to do so subjected you to treatment you did not deserve. Apology noted, sir. I've submitted a formal commendation for your performance during the qualification exercises, both the initial assessment and the advanced field evaluation, the flame shot at 1,700 meters and the perfect run through compromised conditions. Those demonstrations of skill deserve official recognition. Recognition from the officer who tried to make me fail carries a certain irony, sir." "It does, but it's also the truth. You performed at a level I have rarely witnessed in 3 decades of service. That deserves acknowledgement regardless of the circumstances that led to it." Sloan was silent for a moment, processing not just the words but the shift they represented. Admiral Foss was a man accustomed to command, to being right, to having his judgments accepted without question. Offering this apology cost him something, and that cost made it more meaningful than mere words. "What happens now, sir?" "That depends on what you want." Your administrative leave is concluded. You're cleared to return to active duty. DevGru has requested your immediate return to your unit. Alternatively, if you prefer a different assignment, given everything that's happened, I'm authorized to facilitate that. I'll return to my unit. That's where I belong. Foss nodded, unsurprised. Then, I'll process the orders. You'll deploy within the month. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sir, that narrative you were given about me being unstable, who gave it to you? I don't know. It came through channels from higher authority. By the time it reached me, it had the weight of official assessment, meaning someone with significant influence wanted me discredited before I could testify. That would be my assessment as well, but proving it would require investigation at levels above both our pay grades. Foss met her eyes. For what it's worth, the fact that you survived their attempts to destroy you and gave testimony that resulted in courts-martial suggests that, whoever they were, they failed. Sloane left the building and walked toward the water, needing to see the ocean and feel wind that was not simulated. The Pacific stretched to the horizon, endless and indifferent, its waves following patterns that predated human ambition and would outlast human failure. She thought about the flame she had extinguished with a single impossible shot. That moment had seemed so significant at the time, a demonstration of skill that would protect her through sheer undeniability. But the truth was more complex. The shot had protected her not because it proved her capability, but because it documented that capability so thoroughly that erasing her afterward would raise questions. She had not won through one perfect performance. She had survived through consistent excellence combined with moral courage to speak truth when silence would have been safer. The shot was just one data point in a larger pattern that ultimately could not be dismissed or explained away. Someone called her name, and she turned to see Lieutenant Drummond approaching, looking less uncomfortable than during their previous encounters. Ms. Revere, I heard you're returning to your unit. Word travels fast. It does. I wanted to say that I'm glad. You belong in the field, not trapped in administrative limbo. Thank you, Lieutenant. He hesitated, then added, what you did, testifying the way you did, knowing the consequences. That took courage most people don't have. I just told the truth. That shouldn't require courage. But it does, because truth threatens people who have built careers on convenient fictions. And you paid a price for threatening them. Sloane shrugged slightly. The price would have been higher if I'd stayed silent. At least this way, some accountability resulted. Some consequences for failures that got an American intelligence officer killed. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the ocean. Then Drummond excused himself and walked back toward the administration building, leaving Sloane alone with the waves and the wind and the knowledge that her ordeal, while not ended, had at least moved into a different phase. The following week passed in a blur of administrative processing and preparation for return to her unit. Medical evaluations confirmed she was fit for duty. Psychological assessments found no evidence of instability or impairment. Ironic given the narrative that had been constructed around her. Equipment was issued. Orders were cut. The machinery of military deployment moved forward with its characteristic efficiency. On her last evening at Coronado, Master Chief Creel found her at the range. Not the main qualification range where she had made her impossible shot, but a smaller training range where operators came to maintain skills between deployments. She was working through fundamentals, the kind of basic marksmanship practice that elite shooters never stopped performing, no matter how skilled they became. Creel watched her complete a string of fire before speaking. You know they're going to tell stories about you. Stories? The woman who made the flame shot, the operator who testified against her own command, the sniper who couldn't be broken. He paused. You've become something of a legend, whether you want it or not. Legends are just stories people tell themselves. They're not usually very accurate. No, but they serve a purpose. They remind people what's possible when someone refuses to compromise on what's right. Sloane cleared her weapon and turned to face him. I didn't do anything special, Master Chief. I just did what I was trained to do. Take the shot I was given. Tell the truth when asked. Follow my conscience when orders conflicted with integrity. That's more than most people manage, and it's exactly what makes you special, even if you don't see it. Creel's weathered face showed rare emotion. I've trained a lot of operators over 3 decades. Most of them are good, some are great. A very few are exceptional in ways that transcend technical skill. You're one of those few. Because I made a difficult shot? Because you understood that some shots matter more than others. The flame at 1,700 meters was impressive, but the courage to testify, to stand up against pressure from people who could destroy your career, that shot hit a target that actually mattered. He handed her something then, a small wooden box that bore the marks of careful craftsmanship. She opened it to find a spent brass casing mounted on a plaque, the casing from her flame shot, preserved and polished, with an engraved plate below it. Some shots define who we are, Master Chief Boone Creel. Sloane looked at it for a long moment, feeling emotion she had not expected. The gift was simple, but meaningful in ways that transcended its physical form. It was acknowledgement from someone whose opinion mattered, recognition that carried more weight than any official commendation. Thank you, Master Chief. Don't thank me, just keep being who you are, the kind of operator who never compromises on accuracy, whether that's accuracy of fire or accuracy of truth. He left her alone on the range as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of the flame she had extinguished. She held the wooden box and thought about all the shots she had taken over years of service, the targets eliminated and the missions accomplished and the objectives achieved. But Creel was right. Some shots mattered more than others, and the shots that defined character were not always the ones fired through rifle scopes. The deployment orders came through the next morning. She would rejoin her unit within 48 hours, return to the rotation of training and operations and deployment cycles that defined life in special operations. Back to the work she had trained for, back to the purpose that had driven her through everything that had happened. As she prepared to leave Coronado, she took one last walk along the perimeter fence, looking out at the ocean and thinking about the strange journey from that first impossible shot to this moment of return. She had been tested in ways she had not expected, had survived attempts to destroy her credibility and break her will, had spoken truth in forums where truth was dangerous and costly, and somehow, despite everything, she was still standing, still ready, still committed to the work that mattered. The flame she had extinguished at 1,700 meters had been a small thing, a point of light snuffed out in a fraction of a second, but it had illuminated something larger, had revealed capabilities and character that could not be denied or dismissed. That flame had burned briefly, but its light had cast shadows that exposed truths people wanted to keep hidden. She thought about the officers facing courts-martial now, their careers ending because they had chosen expedience over integrity. She thought about Dr. Anton Ibarra, the intelligence officer who had died, because compartmented systems failed and because someone had wanted him eliminated for reasons that might never be fully understood. She thought about all the small compromises and convenient fictions that accumulated until they became institutional failures with real human costs. One person speaking truth could not fix systemic problems, but one person refusing to participate in the convenient fictions, refusing to stay silent when silence would be safer, that could start something, could create accountability where none existed, could remind others that some principles mattered more than career preservation. The sun climbed higher, burning off the marine layer and exposing the base to clear California light. Sloane turned from the fence and walked toward the building where her gear waited, where the next chapter of her service would begin. She did not know what missions waited ahead, did not know what targets she would be asked to engage or what conditions she would face, but she knew that whatever came, she would face it with the same precision and integrity she brought to everything, the same discipline that had made her an elite operator, the same courage that had allowed her to testify despite the costs, the same commitment to accuracy, whether measured in millimeters at impossible distance or in words spoken under oath. Some people believed excellence was enough, that if you were good enough at what you did, the system would protect and promote you. Sloane knew better now. Excellence made you valuable, but it did not make you safe. Sometimes it made you dangerous, especially when that excellence extended beyond technical skill to include moral courage. But knowing that did not change what she would do. She would continue to be excellent, continue to speak truth, continue to take the shots that mattered, whether fired through scopes or delivered in testimony chambers. Because that was who she was, and changing that to make powerful people comfortable would mean losing the only thing that actually defined her worth. She collected her gear and carried it to the transport that would take her to the airport. Other operators were deploying as well, heading to various assignments around the world. They nodded to her with respect that had not been present before. Word had spread, not just about the flame shot, but about everything that followed, about her testimony, about the officers facing consequences, about one operator who had refused to be silenced or broken. The flight was long, and the destination was classified, and the mission parameters would not be shared until after arrival. But that was normal. That was the rhythm of service she understood and embraced. Brief, plan, execute, debrief, repeat. The cycle that gave structure and purpose to days and weeks and years. As the aircraft climbed through clouds and California disappeared below, Sloane closed her eyes and felt something she had not felt in months. Not peace exactly, but the absence of tension that came from knowing that the immediate crisis had passed. The testimony was given. The truth was spoken. The consequences were unfolding according to their own logic now, beyond her ability to influence or control. She had done what she could do, had been as accurate with her words as she had been with her shots, had maintained integrity when compromise would have been easier. That would have to be enough, because it was all she had to offer. The future remained uncertain. There would be other operations, other targets, other moments where split-second decisions determined life and death. There would probably be other situations where institutional pressures conflicted with personal conscience. But she had proven to herself that she could navigate those situations without losing who she was, could face pressure and survive, could speak truth and endure the consequences. The flame at 1,700 meters had been extinguished in a fraction of a second, but the light it cast had illuminated something that would last much longer. Not just her skill as a shooter, but her character as a person who understood that some shots were about more than hitting targets. Some shots were about defining who you were and what you stood for when everything else was stripped away. She had made that shot, not just with her rifle, but with her choices and her testimony and her refusal to compromise. And that shot, unlike the physical one that had started everything, would continue to matter long after the brass casing was forgotten and the stories faded into legend. Some truths, once spoken, could not be unspoken. Some stands, once taken, could not be reversed. She had become one of those truths, one of those stands. A reminder that excellence combined with integrity was possible, that courage existed even in systems designed to suppress it, that one person telling the truth could make a difference even when powerful people wanted that truth buried. The aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude. Around her, other operators settled in for the long flight, some sleeping, some reading, some lost in their own thoughts about missions completed and missions ahead. Sloane opened her eyes and looked out the window at clouds stretching to the horizon, at the vast sky that cared nothing for human drama or military justice or the small victories that felt so significant to those who achieved them. But those victories mattered anyway, not to the sky or the ocean or the indifferent universe, but to the people who fought for them and to the principles they represented. Truth mattered, integrity mattered, accountability mattered. Not because the cosmos cared, but because people needed to believe that choices had consequences, and that doing the right thing, even at great personal cost, was worth the sacrifice. Sloane had paid that cost, had stood at that firing line and made that impossible shot, had stood in that tribunal and given that crucial testimony, had survived the attempts to break her and emerged with her integrity intact and her capabilities proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The future would bring new challenges, new pressures, new situations where the easy path diverged from the right path. But she would face them as she had faced everything else, with precision, with courage, with unwavering commitment to accuracy in all things, whether measured in fractions of an inch or in words carefully chosen and truthfully spoken. That was enough. That was everything. That was who she was and who she would continue to be, regardless of what came next. The flame was extinguished. The truth was told. The legend was beginning. And somewhere in the distance, always in the distance, new targets waited. Some people change the world through grand gestures and historic moments. Others do it through quiet excellence and moral courage in situations where no one is watching except their own conscience. If you've ever stood alone for what was right, knowing the cost but refusing to compromise, your story matters. Share it in the comments below. And if this story reminded you that integrity and excellence can coexist even in systems designed to suppress both, consider subscribing. Because the world needs more people who understand that some shots are worth taking, no matter the consequences.